My daughter sent a message saying, "We've decided we're going to distance ourselves from you. Please don't look for us anymore." I replied, "No problem. I'm going to cancel the automatic payments." My daughter texted me that on a Tuesday afternoon in March, and I sat in my truck in the Home Depot parking lot and read it 4 times. Then I typed back exactly what I felt. "No problem. I'm going to cancel the automatic payments." I hit send, set my phone in the cup holder, and sat there for a long time with the engine running. My name's Frank. I'm 56 years old. I live in a suburb outside of Nashville, Tennessee. I've been a general contractor for 30 years, and I've raised 2 kids mostly on my own after their mother walked out when my daughter was 9 and my son was 6. That text came from my daughter, Maddie. She was 28 at the time. The "we" was her and her husband, Kevin. The automatic payments were something I had set up about 2 years earlier. When Maddie and Kevin bought their first house, I didn't give them cash for the down payment. Kevin's pride wouldn't allow that. So instead, I set up an automatic transfer of $800 a month into their joint checking account. It wasn't labeled, it wasn't a loan. I never once mentioned it or asked what they did with it. I just did it because I wanted to, because that's what you do when your kid is trying to build something. Now let me back up so this actually makes sense. Maddie and I had always been close. Not in some overly emotional way where we talked about our feelings every 5 minutes. We weren't those people. But she was my girl. After her mom left, Maddie became the one who kept things together in the house. She made sure her little brother Ryan had his lunch packed. She learned to make scrambled eggs by the time she was 10. I was working 12, 14 hours a day trying to keep my business alive after the divorce, and Maddie just stepped up. I never asked her to, she just did. I knew it cost her something. I knew that even when she was a kid. But I told myself I'd make it right later. I told myself I'd slow down eventually. That's the lie parents tell themselves. That there's always a later. Ryan turned out different. Not in a bad way. He just didn't carry things the way Maddie did. He was easygoing. He played baseball. He went to college in Knoxville, got a business degree, and now he works in logistics. He calls me every Sunday. He comes by most weekends. Ryan and I have a simple relationship. It works. Maddie went to Middle Tennessee State, got her teaching degree, and started working at an elementary school about 20 minutes from my house. That's where she met Kevin. He was a PE teacher at the same school. They dated for about a year and a half, got married when she was 25, and bought a house in Murfreesboro about a year after that. Kevin was fine. I never had a problem with Kevin. He was quiet, polite, shook my hand every time he saw me, said yes sir and no sir. He came from a family where his dad had been in the military and his mom worked at a bank in Clarksville. Very structured, very by the book. I could tell early on that Kevin didn't fully understand the way I lived or the way I raised my kids, but he never said anything about it. He just kept his distance in a respectful way. I should have paid more attention to that distance, but I didn't. The first sign that something was off was about 4 months before that text. It was Thanksgiving. I hosted it like I always do. Ryan came with his girlfriend Lauren. Maddie and Kevin came. I cooked a turkey, made my mother's cornbread dressing, had all the sides. It was a normal Thanksgiving. But during dinner, Kevin made a comment. We were talking about Ryan's job and how his company had just opened a new distribution center, and Kevin said something like, "Must be nice to just fall into opportunities like that." It wasn't aggressive, but it had an edge to it. Ryan just laughed it off. I didn't say anything. Maddie looked down at her plate. Later that night, after everyone left, I was loading the dishwasher and Ryan was sitting at the kitchen counter on his phone. He looked up and said, "Did you notice Kevin tonight?" I said, "What about him?" Ryan said, "I don't know, man. He just seems off. Like he's got something to say but he won't say it." I said, "He's fine, he's just quiet." Ryan gave me a look but didn't push it. He left about 20 minutes later, and I didn't think about it again. The second sign was in January. Maddie and I had always done a Sunday lunch thing, just the 2 of us. We'd go to this little Mexican place on Main Street, sit in the same booth and talk. Nothing deep, just catching up. She'd tell me about her students. I'd tell her about whatever project I was working on. It was our thing. In January, she canceled 3 Sundays in a row. First she said she was tired. Then she said they had things to do around the house. The third time, she didn't even give a reason. She just texted, "Can't make it this Sunday, sorry." I called her that night and she didn't answer. She texted back 10 minutes later, Sorry, Dad, just busy. Talk soon. Talk soon. That's the kind of thing you say to a coworker, not your father. I didn't push it. I told myself she was just busy. Newlyweds have a life. I get it. The third sign was in February. Ryan came over on a Saturday to help me build a shelving unit in my garage. We were measuring and cutting wood, and he stopped and said, "Dad, have you talked to Maddie lately?" I said, "Not really, she's been busy." Ryan leaned against the workbench and said, "Lauren talked to her last week. Maddie told Lauren that she and Kevin have been seeing a therapist." I set the saw down. "A therapist? For what?" Ryan said, "I don't know. Lauren didn't want to pry, but Maddie apparently said something about needing to set boundaries with family." "Which family?" Ryan just looked at me. I said, "With me? She's setting boundaries with me?" Ryan said, "I don't know, Dad. I'm just telling you what Lauren said." I picked the saw back up and didn't say anything for a while. Then I said, "What boundaries could she possibly need with me? I don't call her 5 times a day. I don't show up unannounced. I don't interfere with her marriage. I literally do nothing except be here." Ryan said, "I know." I said, "So what is it?" He didn't have an answer. I called Maddie the next day. She answered, which I took as a good sign. I asked her how she was doing, and she gave me these short, flat answers. Everything was fine, work was good, the house was good, Kevin was good, everything was just fine. I finally said, "Ryan mentioned you guys have been seeing someone." Silence. Then she said, "Who told you that?" I said, "It doesn't matter who told me, I'm just asking if you're okay." She said, "We're fine, Dad, it's just a marriage thing, everyone goes to counseling sometimes." I said, "Okay, well, if you ever want to talk about it." She said, "I know, thanks." And that was it, the shortest conversation we'd ever had. Now here's where I need to be honest about something, because if I don't tell you this part, the rest of the story won't make sense. About 3 years ago, before Maddie and Kevin got married, I said something, one thing, and I didn't think it was a big deal at the time, but I think it planted something in Kevin's head that grew. We were at a barbecue at my house. It was me, Maddie, Kevin, Ryan, and a few of my guys from work. Kevin had had a few beers, and he started talking about his plans. He said he wanted to eventually open a CrossFit gym. He had this whole business plan mapped out. He was passionate about it, and I listened, and then I said, probably in front of 3 or 4 people, "That's a tough business, man. Most of those places go under in 2 years. Maybe just keep the teaching job steady and think about it later." That's it. That's all I said. Maddie gave me a look, but she didn't say anything in front of everyone. Later, when people were leaving, she pulled me aside in the kitchen and said, "Dad, you can't say things like that to him." I said, "What?" I was being honest. It's a hard business. I've seen guys lose everything on those gyms. She said, "He doesn't need you to tell him what's realistic. He needs you to believe in him." I said, "I do believe in him. I'm just giving him advice." She said, "It didn't sound like advice. It sounded like you don't think he's capable." I laughed. I actually laughed. I said, "Maddie, I've been building things my whole life. I was just talking business." She didn't laugh. She said, "Please don't do that again." And I didn't. I never brought it up again. Kevin never mentioned it. I honestly forgot about it. But I think Kevin remembered. I think Kevin had been carrying that moment for 3 years, turning it over in his head, adding weight to it every time he felt insecure about something. And I think at some point, in one of those therapy sessions, he told that story, and it came out bigger than it actually was. That's what happens in therapy sometimes. You tell a story from your perspective, and it grows. And the therapist probably asked Maddie how she felt about it, and Maddie probably said she felt caught in the middle, and then suddenly I wasn't just a dad who made a careless comment at a barbecue. I was the father-in-law who didn't respect her husband. I was the controlling father figure who shot down his dreams, I'm guessing, because Maddie never told me any of this directly. I only found out months later. But back to March. Back to the text. After I sent my reply, I sat in that parking lot for maybe 15 minutes. Then I drove home. I didn't call anyone. I didn't text Ryan. I just went home, fed my dog, a big, lazy golden retriever named Biscuit, and sat on my couch. About 2 hours later, my phone buzzed. It was Maddie. "Did you really just say that?" I called her. She didn't answer. She texted back, "I don't want to talk on the phone right now." I said, "Then why did you text me that? You send me a message saying don't look for you anymore, and you expect me to just say okay?" She said, "I meant what I said. Kevin and I have talked about this for a long time. We need space from certain family dynamics. This isn't sudden for us. I said, certain family dynamics, meaning me. She didn't respond for 4 minutes, then she said yes. I said, Maddie, can you at least tell me what I did? Because I've been racking my brain and I can't figure out what I've done that's so terrible, you need to cut me off. She said, it's not one thing, it's a pattern. I said, what pattern? Give me an example. She said, the money. I stared at my phone. The money? The money I send you every month? That's a problem? She said, yes, it's a problem. It comes in every month and it feels like control. Like you're keeping us dependent on you so you can stay involved in our life on your terms. I sat there completely still. I said, Maddie, I set that up because I wanted to help you. I never once attached a condition to it. I never asked you for anything in return. She said, I know you think that, but every time that deposit hits, Kevin feels like he's not providing for me. And I feel like I can't say anything to you because you'll take it as rejection. I said, so instead of telling me, you just decided to cut me off. She said, we decided together. I put my phone down. I picked it back up. I said, okay, so what do you want? You want me to stop the payments? She said, yes. I said, fine, done. She said, and we need time, like real time, not a week, not a month. We need to figure out our marriage without the interference. I said, what interference? I don't interfere. I literally see you maybe twice a month, if that. She said, it's not just about how often you're around, it's about, Dad, I can't explain all of this in a text. I'm just asking you to respect what we're asking. I didn't respond for a long time. Then I said, does Ryan know? She said, no, please don't drag him into this. I said, he's your brother. She said, I know, but this is between us. Please. I said, okay. That was the last thing I said to my daughter for 4 months. The next morning, I got up, went to my bank, and canceled the automatic transfer. It took about 3 minutes. The teller asked if I wanted to set up anything else, and I said no. I walked out to my truck and realized my hands were shaking. Not because I was angry. Because I was scared. When your kid tells you they want distance, there's a part of your brain that knows this could be permanent. There's a part of you that knows some families never come back from this. And I had seen it happen. I had a buddy from high school who hadn't spoken to his daughter in 11 years over some argument about a wedding. 11 years. His granddaughter was 9 years old and didn't know who he was. I wasn't going to let that happen, but the first also wasn't going to chase someone who didn't want me around. I've got pride, maybe too much of it. That's probably something I should talk to a therapist about myself. The first few weeks were the hardest. Every Sunday, I'd pick up my phone to text Maddie about lunch, and then I'd remember. Every time I drove past that Mexican restaurant on Main Street, I'd feel this hollow thing in my chest. Every time I saw something at Home Depot that made me think of a project at her house, I'd just keep walking. Ryan came over the Sunday after the text, like normal. He sat at the kitchen counter, and I made breakfast, and he said, "Where's Maddie today?" I said, "She's not coming." He said, "Is she sick?" I said, "No, she and Kevin are taking some space from me." Ryan set his fork down. "What does that mean?" I said, "It means they don't want me contacting them for a while." Ryan said, "Are you serious?" I said, "Dead serious." He said, "Dad, what happened?" I said, "Honestly, son, I don't fully know. She says it's a pattern. She says the money I was sending them made Kevin feel like he wasn't providing. She says I'm controlling." Ryan said, "You're the least controlling person I know." I said, "Apparently not." Ryan was quiet for a while. Then he said, "So you're just going to sit here and let her do this?" I said, "What's the alternative? Show up at her house? Force a conversation she doesn't want to have? That'll just prove her point." Ryan said, "Have you tried calling Kevin?" I said, "No, and I'm not going to. This is between me and Maddie." Ryan said, "Kevin's the one pushing this, isn't he?" I said, "I don't know. She says it's both of them." Ryan shook his head. He looked frustrated. He said, "Dad, I love Maddie, but she's been different since she married Kevin. She pulls away from everything. She barely talks to Lauren anymore. She didn't even come to Lauren's birthday dinner last month." I said, "She told me not to drag you into this." Ryan said, "She doesn't get to decide what I care about." I said, "Ryan, just give it time. Let me handle it." He didn't look happy about it, but he dropped it. Over the next 2 months, I threw myself into work. I had a big renovation project in Franklin, a whole house gut job, and I spent 12 hours a day there. It was the only thing that shut my brain off. You can't think about your daughter not talking to you when you're trying to rewire a 1970s electrical panel. But at night, when I came home and fed Biscuit and sat on the couch, it all came back. I'd scroll through old photos on my phone. Maddie at her college graduation. Maddie and Kevin's wedding. The three of us at a Titans game. I'd stare at those photos and try to find the moment where things went wrong. I couldn't find it. In April, Lauren called me. She was careful about it. She said she was just checking in. I told her I was fine. She said, "Frank, Ryan told me what's going on. I just want you to know I think it's wrong." I said, "Lauren, I appreciate that, but stay out of it. The last thing I need is Maddie thinking I'm sending people to fight my battles." Lauren said, "I'm not trying to fight anything. I just miss her. And I don't think this is coming from Maddie." I said, "Where do you think it's coming from?" She said, "Kevin. I've always felt like he wants her to himself. Like he wants to build this little world where it's just the two of them and nobody else gets to be close." I didn't say anything. Lauren said, "That's not healthy." I said, "Maybe not, but it's her marriage, and if she's choosing to go along with it, I have to respect that." Lauren was quiet. Then she said, "You're a better person than me." I said, "I'm not, I'm just tired." In May, something happened that almost broke me. I was at the grocery store on a Saturday morning, in the cereal aisle, and I saw Maddie. She was about 30 feet away, pushing a cart, by herself. She hadn't seen me yet. I stood there with my hand on a box of Cheerios and just looked at her. She looked good. She had her hair pulled back. She was wearing one of those Titans sweatshirts I bought her 2 Christmases ago. And for about 5 seconds, I thought about walking over. Just saying hey. Just being normal. But she had asked me not to. She had specifically said, "Please don't look for us anymore." And showing up in the cereal aisle would be looking for her, even if I didn't mean it that way. I turned around and walked the other way. I went down the frozen food aisle, then the pet food aisle, then I checked out and left. I sat in my truck in the parking lot and felt something I hadn't felt since the day their mother left. That same powerless feeling, like no matter what you do, you're losing someone and you can't stop it. I drove home and Ryan was in my driveway. He said he'd been trying to call me. I told him I'd left my phone in the truck. He said, "Dad, I need to tell you something and you're not going to like it." I said, "What?" He said, "Lauren talked to Maddie last night." I said, "I told Lauren to stay out of it." He said, "I know, but Lauren didn't push it. Maddie called her, and Maddie was crying." I felt my whole body tighten. Why was she crying? Ryan said, "Because Kevin wants to move to Clarksville, near his parents. He's been applying for teaching jobs up there. He hasn't told Maddie's side of the family yet. He wants to just go." I said, "She'd be 3.5 hours away." Ryan said, "I know." I said, "Did she say she wants to go?" Ryan said, "She said she doesn't know what she wants. She said Kevin told her that moving would be a fresh start for their marriage. Away from the stress, away from—" He paused. "Away from you, Dad." I leaned against my truck and looked up at the sky. I didn't say anything for a long time. Ryan said, "Are you okay?" I said, "No, but I'll be all right." He said, "What are you going to do?" I said, "Nothing." He said, "Dad." I said, "Ryan, listen to me. If I call her right now and try to stop this, I become the exact thing she says I am. Controlling, interfering, not letting her live her own life. I have to let her make this decision, even if it's the wrong one." Ryan said, "What if she moves and you never see her again?" I said, "Then I'll drive to Clarksville." He looked at me. I could see him trying not to cry. Ryan's not a crier, neither am I, but we were both close. I said, "She's my daughter. I'm not giving up on her. But I'm not going to force my way into her life either. There's a difference between giving up and letting go. I'm letting go, for now." Ryan nodded. He got in his car and left. I went inside and sat on the couch. Biscuit put his head on my knee, and I just sat there. 3 weeks later, in early June, I was at the job site in Franklin. It was about 5 in the afternoon, and my phone rang. I didn't recognize the number. I almost didn't answer it. It was Kevin. I hadn't spoken to Kevin in months. I hadn't heard his voice since Thanksgiving. He said, "Hey Frank, it's Kevin." I said, "I know." Silence. He said, "Can you talk for a minute?" I said, "I'm at work, but go ahead." He said, I wanted to talk to you about something, and I want you to just listen before you say anything. Can you do that?" I said, "Go ahead." He took a breath. He sounded nervous. He said, "I know Maddie told you about the space thing, and I know she told you about the money, and I know you probably think this is all coming from me." I didn't say anything, he said, and you'd be right, mostly. I still didn't say anything. He said, Frank, I've been going to therapy, and my therapist pointed some things out to me that I didn't want to see, about my dad, about how I grew up, about how I feel around men who I think are judging me, and I think I projected a lot of that onto you. I set my tape measure down on the sawhorse. He said, that thing you said at the barbecue, about the gym, I know it was 3 years ago. I know you probably don't even remember it exactly, but the first carried it. I carried it like you told me I was never going to be good enough, and every time that money hit our account, it felt like proof. Like you were saying, you can't take care of my daughter, so I have to do it for you. I said, Kevin. He said, let me finish, please. I waited. He said, Maddie doesn't know I'm calling you. She's inside right now. She thinks I'm getting the mail. But I've been sitting in my truck for 20 minutes trying to get the courage to make this call. Because I did something wrong. I didn't just set a boundary. I isolated her. I made her choose between her marriage and her family. And that's not fair. That's not what a good husband does. His voice cracked a little. He said, she misses you, Frank. She won't say it out loud because she thinks she has to be loyal to me. But I see it. She looks at her phone on Sundays. She hasn't been to that Mexican restaurant since February. She cries in the shower so I won't hear her. I closed my eyes. He said, and the Clarksville thing. I was going to take her away from everything she knows because I thought that would fix what was wrong with us. But what's wrong with us isn't about location. It's about me. It's about my own stuff that I haven't dealt with. I said, Kevin, I appreciate you calling. I really do. He said, I'm not asking you to forgive me right now. I needed to tell you that I was wrong. About you, about the money, about all of it. You weren't trying to control us. You were trying to help. And I was too proud and too insecure to see it. I said, what are you going to tell Maddie? He said, I'm going to tell her the truth, that I called you, that I've been the one pushing the distance, and that she needs to call you because I can't keep standing between you two. I said, she might be mad at you. He said, she probably will be, but I'd rather have her mad at me for telling the truth than have her slowly lose her family because I was too proud to admit I was wrong. I said, Kevin? He said, yeah? I said, that barbecue thing, what I said about the gym, that was wrong of me. You were excited about something and I shot it down. I shouldn't have done that, especially in front of other people. I'm sorry. He was quiet for a second. Then he said, thank you. I said, and for what it's worth, I think you'd be good at running a gym. You're disciplined. You're passionate about it. If you ever want to do it, I'll help you build it. Not with money, with my hands. I'll help you build it myself. He didn't say anything for a while, then the first heard him take a shaky breath. He said, I'd like that. I said, okay. He said, okay, I'm going to go talk to Maddie. I said, good luck. He said, Frank? I said, yeah? He said, I know I'm not your son, but you've been more of a father to me in the last 5 minutes than my own dad has been in 5 years. I said, you're at my dinner table every Thanksgiving. That makes you family. He hung up. I stood there in that half-finished house in Franklin, with drywall dust on my boots and a lump in my throat the size of a baseball. I picked up my tape measure and went back to work. I didn't stop until it was dark. That night, around 8:30, my phone rang. It was Maddie. She didn't say anything for the first few seconds. I could hear her breathing. I said, hey Maddie. She said, Dad. I said, I'm here. She said, Kevin told me he called you. I said, he did. She said, I'm so mad at him right now. I said, I figured. She said, but I'm also relieved. Because I didn't know how to fix this. I didn't know how to tell you that I didn't actually want to do this. I just didn't know how to say it without hurting him. I said, you don't have to explain anything to me right now. She said, I missed you so much. Every Sunday, I'd sit on the couch and think about that stupid Mexican restaurant and I felt like I was drowning. I said, I know, I felt it too. She started crying, not loud, just this quiet, steady crying that broke me worse than anything else could have. She said, I'm sorry, Dad, I'm so sorry. I said, don't be sorry, just come home. She said, can I come over tomorrow? I said, Maddie, you can come over right now if you want to. The door's always open, it was never closed, not for 1 second. She cried harder. I said, bring Kevin if you want. She laughed a little through the tears. She said, he'd probably like that. I said, I'll make breakfast. She said, Dad? I said, yeah? She said, "I love you." I said, "I love you too, kid." She showed up the next morning at 8 o'clock. Kevin was with her. He looked like he hadn't slept. He shook my hand at the door, and I pulled him into a hug. He stiffened for a second and then hugged me back. It was awkward, it was brief. But it was real. Maddie walked in and Biscuit lost his mind. He jumped all over her, and she knelt down and buried her face in his fur and cried again. I pretended to be busy at the stove making scrambled eggs, but I wasn't fooling anyone. We sat at the kitchen table and ate. Kevin was quiet at first, but I started asking him about the CrossFit gym idea. Genuinely asking what kind of equipment he'd want, what the layout would look like, where he'd put the parking. And slowly he started talking. His eyes lit up. He pulled out his phone and showed me floor plans he'd saved. And I looked at them and said, "This is good. This is really good, man." Maddie watched us from across the table, and she had this look on her face. Not relief exactly, more like she was seeing something she'd been afraid she'd never see again. After breakfast, Kevin helped me finish the shelving unit in the garage, the one Ryan and I never completed. We worked side by side for 2 hours. He didn't say much, but he was there, and that was enough. Maddie and I sat on the back porch while they worked inside. She said, "Dad, I need to tell you something, and I need you to really hear me." I said, "Go ahead." She said, "When Mom left, I took care of everything because I was scared that if I didn't, you'd leave too. And I've spent my whole life trying to be the person who keeps everyone together. And when Kevin told me he wanted distance from you, I went along with it because I thought if I didn't, I'd lose my marriage. But in doing that, I almost lost you." I said, "You didn't lose me." She said, "I know, but I need you to know why I did it. It wasn't because I agreed with him, it was because I was scared. Again, just like when I was 9 years old." I looked at her for a long time. My daughter. The little girl who learned to make scrambled eggs before she was tall enough to see over the stove. The girl who packed her brother's lunch. The woman who became a teacher because she wanted to take care of kids the way she took care of everyone else. I said, "Maddie, I failed you. Not just recently. When your mom left, I should have been the one holding things together. Instead, I let you do it. And I've been carrying this guilt about that for 20 years. And I think maybe that's why I did the money thing, not to control you, but because I thought if I kept giving, maybe I could make up for not being there when you were little." She stared at me. I said, "I wasn't a perfect dad, I'm still not, but I love you more than anything in this world. And I will never stop being here, even if you tell me to go away, even if you send me a text telling me not to look for you. I will still be here, because that's my job, and I don't quit." She reached over and grabbed my hand. She squeezed it hard. She didn't say anything for a while, then she said, "Can we go to that Mexican restaurant on Sunday?" I said, "I'll get the booth." She laughed. And it sounded like her, the real her. Not the tight, careful version she'd been for months. Just my daughter. That Sunday we went, just the two of us, same booth, same salsa. She told me everything. About the therapy, about Kevin's childhood, about how his dad never showed up for anything and how Kevin was terrified of being seen as a failure, about how the money made him feel like he was failing every single month, about how she'd been caught between us and felt like she was being torn apart. I listened. I didn't defend myself. I didn't explain. I just listened. And at the end I said, "I'm going to keep helping you, but I'm going to ask first from now on, and if you or Kevin say no, it's no. No questions, no guilt." She said, "Deal." I said, "And if Kevin wants to open that gym, I'm going to help him build it. Not because I think he can't do it alone, but because that's what family does." She smiled. She said, "He'd probably like that." I said, "He already said yes." She looked surprised. "When?" I said, "When he called me." She shook her head. "That sneaky idiot." I said, "He's not an idiot, he's just a guy who's been carrying something heavy and finally decided to put it down." She said, "Dad?" I said, "Yeah?" She said, "I'm not going to Clarksville." I said, "I know." She said, "How do you know?" I said, "Because you're sitting right here." She nodded slowly. She picked up a chip, dipped it in salsa and said, "This salsa isn't as good as it used to be." I said, "It's exactly the same as it's always been." She said, "No, it's different." I said, "You're wrong." She said, "I'm never wrong." I said, "You got that from me." She laughed, and I laughed. And for the first time in months, things felt like they were supposed to feel. Not perfect, not fixed, not some movie ending where everything's wrapped up in a bow. But real, two people sitting in a booth, eating chips, being honest with each other and choosing to show up anyway. Ryan came over that afternoon. He walked in, saw Maddie on the couch and said, "Oh, so you're talking to Dad again?" She said, "Shut up, Ryan." He said, "Just asking." She said, "You're such a pain." He said, "Takes one to know one," and that was it. That was the whole reunion. No big dramatic scene, no long tearful speech, just siblings being siblings in my living room while Biscuit tried to sit on both of them at the same time. Kevin and I started talking about the gym a few weeks later. Not seriously at first, just ideas. I went to his house one evening, and we sat at his kitchen table with a laptop and a stack of notebooks, and he walked me through everything. The business model, the membership structure, the classes he wanted to offer. And I realized something as I listened to him. He wasn't the insecure guy I thought he was. He was actually really smart about this. He'd done his homework, he'd been thinking about it for years. He just needed someone to listen. I said, "You know, if you'd shown me this 3 years ago, I wouldn't have said what I said at that barbecue." He said, "I know, I should have shown you instead of just talking about it." I said, "We both made mistakes." He said, "Yeah." I said, "You want to build this thing or not?" He looked at me, he said, "Yeah, I do." I said, "Then let's build it." We started working on it in the fall, found a space in Murfreesboro, not far from their house. I helped him with the build-out on weekends, framing, drywall, flooring, painting. He did the design and the business side. I did the construction. It took about 4 months. Maddie helped with the scheduling software and the social media stuff. Ryan came and helped move equipment on a Saturday. Lauren brought sandwiches. The gym opened in January. Kevin quit his teaching job 2 months later, when the memberships got high enough to support them. Maddie still teaches. She loves it. But she also helps at the gym on weekends, running the front desk, greeting people, being the friendly face that Kevin isn't naturally built to be. I go there 3 mornings a week. I work out for about an hour, and then I sit in the little office in the back and drink coffee with Kevin while he checks his numbers. We don't talk about feelings. We don't talk about the past. We talk about the business, and sports, and what we're grilling that weekend. And every once in a while he'll say something like, "Hey Frank, what do you think about this idea?" And I'll give him my honest opinion. And he listens, and I listen back. And that's how it works now. Maddie and I still do Sunday lunch, same Mexican restaurant, same booth. She still says the salsa changed. She's wrong, but I've stopped arguing about it. I never set up another automatic payment, not because I'm making a point, but because we figured out a different way to be in each other's lives. One that doesn't feel like control to anyone. One that just feels like family. There's no clean way to end this, no big lesson. Just this: my daughter sent me a text that could have ended everything. And for a few months, it felt like it did, but it didn't. Because the thing about family is, even when someone tells you not to look for them, you don't stop knowing where they are. You don't stop caring. You just find a different way to be there. And sometimes, if you're patient enough, they find their way back. I'm sitting on my back porch right now. Biscuit is asleep at my feet. My phone is on the table next to me, and there's a text from Maddie that says, "Kevin's grilling tomorrow. You coming?" I'm going to type back, "I'll bring the cornbread."